Hi everyone, and welcome back to the 7th video for the New Testament survey course. In this section, we're starting to look at the New Testament itself. Before getting into the details of each New Testament book, I want to give you a flyover summary. I'll try to give a big picture overview of the history related in the New Testament, so that you'll have an idea of the whole story before we look at the particular parts. It starts with Jesus. And the story of Jesus starts with his birth. Next, we see the story of his forerunner, John the Baptist, who prepared the people for Jesus' ministry by proclaiming that God was about to do something. And then Jesus came on the scene and spent around 3 years teaching and preaching. And then he was arrested, given an unjust trial, and put to death. But that's not the end of the story. 3 days after his death, he rose from the dead and appeared to hundreds of people, demonstrating his victory over death. And then he ascended into heaven, where he reigns until the time of the end. Now, I've gotten ahead of the story just a bit. I want to go back and look at the first disciples. Disciple just means learner or student, and it refers to Jesus' main followers, who were later to lead the church. During Jesus' teaching and preaching ministry, he called 12 men to be his special close disciples, although he had many others who followed him. These 12 spent significant time with Jesus and were taught by him. They saw his death, and then they saw him and spoke with him many times after he was raised from the dead. After Jesus' resurrection, they were commissioned by him and sent by him to be witnesses about him of what they've seen and learned. They received God's Holy Spirit sent by Jesus to empower them for this. And they spent the rest of their lives testifying about Jesus and leading the movement of all those who believed in him, the church. And so the message of Jesus and the number of people who were following Jesus was continually expanding. It started in Judea, spread out from there to the surrounding regions, and worked its way out in every direction. But the New Testament primarily describes the expansion into Asia Minor, and from there into Europe, and to all the Roman Empire and beyond. And the promise is that it will continue to expand to every nation on the planet. And along the way, the people that believed in Jesus, they're gathered into local congregations of Christians, and leaders are raised up to oversee and serve these congregations. The church is characterized by discipleship and outreach, helping people grow in their faith and reaching out to others with the good news, including sending missionaries to new places that had not yet heard. But the church is also characterized by maintenance, that is, dealing with problems, disciplining unfaithful members, and protecting the church from growing persecution. And the history of the New Testament ends with the promise about how the church will continue to victoriously expand to every nation. And this leads to the last chapter of the New Testament story, which is consummation. Now, the consummation is still future, but it is known by prophecy and promise. There will be judgment, which is good news for those oppressed and those who are sinned against. And it's also bad news for those who reject God. And there will be recreation of heaven and earth in total perfection, without evil or pain. And every knee will bow and every tongue will confess Christ. He and his people will be fully vindicated. And God's people will experience an unmediated display of his glory. And God's enemies will have an unending experience of his wrath. That is the overall history that we see narrated in the New Testament, just the bare bones flyover view. So let's review. The major parts of the New Testament history are Jesus lives, teaches, dies, and raises from the dead. The disciples are trained by Jesus, and they spread the message about him. the church expands geographically, numerically, organizationally, and expands in influence. And we await the coming consummation of all that Jesus has done. Okay, that's it for our very brief survey of the New Testament story. In the next section, we'll introduce a few of the major themes and ideas that you'll find in the New Testament. Thanks for watching.